So we were doing this little surface in here and the big surface on the bonnet. I thought just been looking at this and thinking, what should we do next? Because it's always difficult to know, what order to do things in, and there's no one way of doing these things. I'm looking at this surface in here at this particular point, and it looks to me, as though we're going to do this there's going to be a sort of blend bit here, which then flattens off and then comes back on itself, and then that develops. This becomes a bit deeper here, so there's going to be a surface coming up here, and then this one's going to be intersecting it, and actually it needs to grow towards the back there. But I think rather than continuing with this, I'm just going to start from this front wheel arch and start working on that area. So we'll leave this for the time being, and then we'll come back to that, because then hopefully it'll join up eventually. I mean, this is quite complicated in here, where we've got, if I just get rid of the surfaces there's a lot of surfaces going on here. So we've got the bonnet surface comes up to this line, then it washes out, then it washes out here, and then it changes angle, and then it goes off to a different angle, and this is all, there's a crease down here as well. It's all quite complicated. I think starting from this end and working towards this point will help us determine how this is all going to work together, hopefully. It sort of doesn't really matter, as I've said before, it doesn't really matter the order of things. I mean, you don't want to keep on jumping around and not finishing anything, but I think we've got to a point where I can sort of see what we need to do to this. We need to extend it down, but I think if we start working this way, then we can work back on that. And so let's, I noticed my naming there is not correct, because it just comes up and puts a hashtag 2 on the end, and I want to just control what the names are. So this is my version 2. If you remember, I copied the whole of version 1 at some point. Now let's have a look and see what we've got in here, because I don't think these are on the right layer at all. I don't even know which layer that's on. One of these. So select layers by picked object, see which layer that is. Our body upper, there we go. So I'll take that one off. That's all that. Curves top 3D was that one. I mean, it might be a time to just look at all these curves that we've got, most of which are going to be not needed anymore, and I can just tidy up a bit. That was 2D. I don't think we need those either, because we've developed those into 3D and then changed them. So I think I'm going to just delete that lot. And then we can also get rid of, we can say delete unused layers. So that should get rid of some of them. Sometimes you find that there appears to be nothing on there. If I open that up, it's just groups. So the groups are just names that don't necessarily belong to anything. And so we can just delete that layer. It's got nothing actually physical on it. And this one, for some reason, again, it's not showing that there's anything on it, but because there's no arrow there's no arrow where we can pick the objects. So I'm just going to delete that one as well, just to tidy up a little bit, so we don't end up with hundreds of layers that we don't really need. So I'm just going to call this body side now, and we'll give that a color, make that blue. So I'm thinking of starting from, we've got this strong break here, this line here, which sort of disappears into nothing. So I think if we concentrate on this area, maybe also deal with this front edge, because I did say that that's something that we need to do. I seem to have pressed the button, which now means I can't turn the shading off. I don't know what I've done. Maybe there we go. I think it's what happened is sometimes you go into this area by mistake. I don't know which button I pressed, but if you press tab and it goes into here, and now I try and use hotkeys, the hotkeys are appearing up here, So a single hotkey of S to turn the shading on and off, and nothing's happening. And so what you have to do is then press Tab again to get back into the window, and then you find the hotkey works now when I press S. So if your hotkeys don't seem to work, it might be that you've gone accidentally into that area, which is what happened to me just then. So I think, yeah, we should work on this, try and get this edge in, and also this area here. So maybe I know this isn't part of the body side, but I'm just going to assign it to the body side for the time being, so we can work with that edge there. So let's look at that in side view. Now this looks like it's a straight line all the way through there until we squash it up, and then it doesn't look quite like a straight line. It actually looks like it's coming off at two different angles, but I think it should be all the way through. I think we should make that into a straight line, to be honest. Now we had a plane some time ago where I created a plane out here so that we could work in side view and shade everything up, but we can put curves on that plane. So let's switch our planes on here. Now I've been going backwards and forwards. You know, we can go into the construction plane editor and find these planes in here, but also you can open up the plane layer here and you'll see hopefully the objects that we've got on there. So you can switch them on and off here. So the one that I've got, which fortunately I've named, is Y minus 1500. That's that one there, which I've used before. You can see it comes on in the construction plane editor as well, so you can switch it on and off there as an alternative. I mean, one of the things you can do in here is you can say look at, which will take you to the top view of that plane, but really you can switch them on and off here if you prefer, and then just go into the view cube to find the view that you want. So I think the first thing to do is to create a line inside view. So I'm going to use that plane there. So we're going to set the CP to that. And then so when we look at that inside view and create lines here, they're all going to be on that plane. So let's create a new layer. I don't know what number we're up to here. I'm just going to call it. I mean, if you put in 0, 1, it has and it adds a hash something on the end. It doesn't actually matter. Like I say, most of the curves I don't really care about too much. They're usually temporary, so really the naming doesn't matter as long as it's unique. Can be anything you like. So let's squash that up, and then I'm going to put in a curve here. Now that does wash out to somewhere, but we might as well make it as long as possible. And we can shade that up so you can see the curve on top of it, which is useful. And I think what we should do is make this match up with this. Obviously the angle is important, but I think it's important that this matches up here reasonably close to the mesh. And then on the back edge, we've just got to get the angle right to whatever we think it should be. So it won't join up with the mesh on there, but that doesn't matter. We just want to make it nice and neat and tidy. So you can see, you know, in the mesh, when you start to scrutinize the mesh, there will be some lumps and bumps as well in the data that we may choose to ignore, that we may choose to do something slightly different with. Obviously, if you can discuss it with the designer and say, you know, do you want this at this particular angle, and the chances are the designer would say no, he meant it to be, you know, at a particular angle like this. But if you haven't got, you know, if you haven't got access to the designer, of course, then you just have to make some decisions, and if they're wrong, then you can always modify the model afterwards. I think that's the key thing about the block model, is that you want to build it in such a way that that you can modify it. So keep it as simple as possible. So we'll go with that line, and then I will actually, I'll just make that into a template. So rather than hiding it completely, we can make it into a template, so we can still see it's there, but it doesn't interfere with anything that we're doing. So with this line, we now want to make that and into a construction surface, or you can make it into a plane. But I think I'll do it as a construction surface, so an MS draft surface, straight into Y0. Or we actually want this front curve to go from one side to the other, like we've done with our surfaces. So another way we could do this is if we go into toggle CP, go back to the on our world space here, and then we can mirror that across. So if I duplicate that across there, and so we've got that on exactly the same side there, and then we can put in a skin between the two. So that can be our construction surface. So let's put that on a layout there. I've got one called Con already, actually a folder called construction. I suppose I should be using that, but it doesn't matter. And I'll make that red. I mean, I haven't really got to, too many conventions with colors, but in general, my curves tend to be green most of the time. Construction surfaces, I tend to make them red just so they stand out. And then the things I'm working on are often blue. I find those colors easy to see. So now let's have a look at that in plan view. So what I'm going to now do is try and create this curve on the front edge. And the logical thing to do there is if I go and pick that template and then I'll untemplate it. So I've got Control T to do that. And then I can take that front edge, just duplicate it. And then we'll extend that and see what we get. So I'll try and keep things on the right layers, but now this is going to be symmetric, of course. So we put symmetry on it. And then when we extend it, which is probably going to curve round a lot, because the trouble is the spacing of the CVs here is very close together here. So when I extend this, I think this is probably going to cause a problem like that. And it's because the spacing of the CVs at the end is very close. So it's probably about as far as we can go, actually. So we'll just leave that as it is. But we want to get back to this edge. So I'm going to pick that surface again and just template it using Control T. And then we could just simply move that, or we could offset it. Offsetting is, strictly speaking, is more what we want, but we'll just go with moving it, which is an approximation of an offset in this case. And I think because we're putting in an extra surface here, so it doesn't matter too much. Now it's below this surface, which is why we can't see it. There's no reason we can't just raise it up, just so that we can see it when we're moving it in this view. And so the other thing that we want to do, so we'll just leave that where it is for the time being. Well, let's just see how close that is. So I will modify that a little bit. I'm just going to modify it to the data a bit. Something like that. And then we can project that down onto this surface. So I'm going to project it as a curve. So it's onto that surface there in the Z direction. I'm going to match the original and do that. I don't need history on because I'm just going to get rid of the original, because we're projecting it onto a completely flat surface. It's going to have a deviation of 0. So that's fine. Again, I need to be putting these onto the right layers, or I should be working in the right layer, of course. There's a couple of curves here that we don't actually need because I've used those, so I'll get rid of those while I'm thinking about it. Now we need this curve to go round to the wheel arch, so we ought to build this wheel arch actually. That's another thing that we should do. I'll take that construction surface off for the time being. We need a little bit more data here because there's a bit of front bumper I think that we're missing. So in the mesh, we bring that back in. Now on this front bump, on this wheel arch here, I don't think this is, I don't know whether this is deliberate, but there's definitely an angle break here. The rear wheel arch doesn't have that. I don't know whether that's just a limitation of the mesh. I'm going to assume it is, and I'm going to make that actually into an arc there. Right, so if we bring in the wheels as well, that will help us to sort of center this thing. Now, because we've got a mesh here, it's a little bit difficult to see. Let's make the mesh less transparent so we can see the center point. Now, some time ago, I was struggling to get a line into picking this mesh, because if you try and do, I'm trying to do Control and Alt and try and pick up that center point, and it won't let me do it. And I'm wondering whether actually, if I go into construction point, whether that will let me do it. No, it doesn't let me do it either. No. Which is somewhat annoying, but we'll use that center point as a visual reference to our wheel arch there. So we're in curves here. Again, we want to be in this construction plane here. So let's pick that, just so that our curves are outside of the geometry so we can see them. And then we'll create a circle. Well, we don't want the whole circle. We just want 180 degrees. So I'm going to create a circle that's just an arc at the top. We're going to do it in one segment and then create that. So I'll just do it visually. I suppose what I could do is set up a plane there. That'd be another way to do it. But let's just do it visually here. It's going to be close enough. Extend that, expand that out. So the top part of that is pretty much circular, which is often the case. And then as we come down here, it usually straightens out, which is also the case in here. So let's see what happens if we do that. I'm regretting not putting a plane on there. I should have put a plane on there. I'm actually going to start that again. So let's get rid of that. So I'm going to set up a new plane. And we'll do it in world again. So it's always parallel to where we are. And I'm just going to eyeball that, put it on there. And we'll set that construction plane. And I'm going to call that something. So call it wheel arch front. And we also want to put it onto this into this planes layer here. Comes out there, so we always know where it is. Probably should move that actually. So let's, because I want it really out here at Y 1500 would be a logical place to put it, the same location as this, just for consistency. So let's toggle the planes, and then we'll pick that plane again. And if I go into the information window, it won't let me move it, or will it? No, it won't let me move it at the minute because it's got history on it. I can tell by the color. So let's delete the history. Now it should let me move it. Yeah, it's also gone to the plane for some reason. Let's do that again. So if I look at that, it tells me the origin. Amazingly, it's almost a round number. It's almost 1500 or 1000 rather, minus 1000. But I want to make it minus 1500 just for consistency with the other plane. So we'll put it there. If I go into the plane, so that's what it tells you when you're in model space. It'll tell you it's at 1500. If I go into the plane, if I go and select that plane and then look at it, it'll say 0, because relative to that plane, that's the value that we're looking at. Now the plane symbol is microscopic there. And we can't pick it in there, don't think. Oh yes, we can. Yeah, so it's to do with the scale. If you actually want that plane symbol to be visible, which you would do, then we can increase that scale. So the scale in the X and the Y direction of that plane, sometimes it comes out rather small. So let's make that, say, 20 by 20, just so that we can actually see the plane, because it's a bit difficult to see it otherwise. So we can see that we're on that plane. So now if I look from the side view, when we create our curves, they will be outboard of the data, which is good. I'm going to make the mesh transparent again. We don't really need that. And then we'll put our arc in. So it's 180, etc. And now we can just snap to that point on the grid using Alt. Something like that. And if we extend that, down to here, so we want to go below the base of the vehicle. So you can see it, it's pretty much circular, apart from the last bit, which sort of straightens out. So we can usually get away with just moving this point. I mean, if you wanted to keep that completely circular, you'd have to split it into 2 bits, but we're not going to do that because we're doing a concept vehicle, so we don't want to, we don't need it 100% accurate. As long as it's roughly circular, it's going to be fine at the top. So by pushing that one in and pushing that one out, we get back to more or less the same shape here. Bring that out there, push that one back there, maybe push that one a little bit. Something like that. And then of course you can put, if you want to look at it, you can put the curvatures on, and you can see that most of that is pretty regular, and then it tightens up or flattens off at the end rather. And we want to create this. We want to create a surface that goes in the wheel arch. So we just do an MS draft on that one. And we know we're at minus 1500. So if we go and pick that curve there, nothing happens. Again, as we've seen before, sometimes two surfaces on, which means you won't get anything, because it needs a surface to actually drop onto. If we take that off, then suddenly a surface appears in the wrong direction because we've got Z on rather than Y. So we want Y on. We also want to flip it around the other way so it goes inboard. And we also want to limit the length of it. The minute it's 15 or 5,000 something, we want to make it 1500. So it just goes into the center. I'm actually still in this layer curves. Let's call this, create a new one called wheel arch. I'll just call it wheel arch F. We don't really need that curve now. We've done that. Now we've done we've shown you a wheel arch before, and the way that I did it was to I think I did an MS draft off this edge at 90 degrees and then pushed it all in, and that's the way I do those now. But the way that I used to do that is slightly different. So if I'm going to template that as well. So we've got a few things with template on. It's just useful to have template on sometimes rather than putting them on another layer, so that I don't forget that I've got that geometry in there. But another way, the way that I used to do wheel arches was this wheel arch flat would be to do something like, if we start off with, first of all, on a plane, I mean, it can be at the center, it doesn't actually matter which way around you do this, but if we started off with that view, and then we just create a planar surface, so it's under plane here, so we're just going to create a surface which is plane. I can start off with that center point and then scale it, something like that. Now that's got to degree 3x3. We don't need degree 3x3. In fact, in the menu, you can change that to 1x1, I think. Yeah, I could have made it 1x1 to start with, but let's just drop that down, make it very, very simple. And then we can move that inboard. So you sort of move it in until it starts to touch the geometry. Of course, you can put sections on as well. I'll take that wheel away, don't need that. And then we can just mess around with the CVs. So I'm just doing it. It's obviously completely flat at the minute, so there's no shape to it at all. And then we can keep on modifying that, adding CVs until we've got yeah, so I'll make it 2x2. Then we can just move those in and out in the Y direction. So what I'm trying to do is get it to just touch the inside edge of that wheel arch there. And we have to slow it down now, increase the mouse sensitivity. Probably need some Z sections on as well. But might move individual CVs at this stage. So I'm looking at these sections here. And we keep doing that until we're very close. And then we can take, so if I now go and pick that template and untemplate it for a minute, and then we'll copy this. This gets difficult. I mean, the reason for templating that as well is that it gets very difficult to see because you've got sections on it which you don't really need. It's just that they appear. And so I am going to put a curve back on that edge. And then we'll template that surface again. And then we can project that curve in the Y direction. like so. So the fact that it's not 100%, it says 0.2, really doesn't matter because we've made this surface up anyway, so we can always change that. But you could do that. And then the other thing that we can do is then, if we go into the side view, let's just take that curve and the mesh. And actually we don't want the rebuild one. We'll just delete that one. And then we can offset that curve. So we'll offset that by I to give us the outer edge that we want. And then you can skin between the two. And that gives you the flat approximately. But like I've said before, don't actually bother to do this anymore. I don't bother to do that big flat surface anymore, because when I get to this point, I always want to modify it anyway. So I just go straight for this. Usually I just put a curve in, do the MS draft off the end of the flat surface that we had, or this arch surface, and then push the whole thing in. So it's the same result really, but you just skip this bit of the process. So I'll get rid of this, or I'll put it on here, the construction layer here. So let's have a look at this. I mean, it's probably close enough, to be honest, that front arch, but but it is flat as well. That's the other thing, that we would want crown on it, with a little bit of crown on it, which we could do in the skin function anyway. But the important thing is, does this look okay in these views really? Now I seem to have, I don't know what's going on there. Get rid of the curves, don't need those. And then I want to modify that. The trouble is with this is that I've got some twist on that, which I don't like the look of, in fact. I'm going to delete that outer curve. I'm actually going to delete that surface, and I'm going to do an MS draft of this instead. But I'm going to just come out of here. Obviously that's not what I want. So I want that to come out at 90 degrees, like so, and I want the length to be whatever it is. I'll just make it 100. So it's going to be oversized. But the beauty of that is it shouldn't have a twist on it. It should actually, I mean, it'll have some sort of twist on it, but maybe not quite as it was with the other option. And then I can put explicit control on, of course, to keep that down. I'm not going to put any crown on it. Don't want degree 2 at the minute, just want degree 1. And we shall have, I can put create history on there. For the time being. So on our curve there, let's put the CVs on there. We can adjust those points in the Y direction to try and get it a bit closer to the section here. And the MS draft surface, because we've got history on, we'll be updating. The fact that this is one big curve does mean that the CVs are quite a long way from our edge, which just it's a good thing because it's nice and simple, but it also means you've got to zoom out to see where the CVs are, and so from that point of view, it's a little bit tricky. Now on the mesh here, this looks pretty continuous here, which is what we need, and then there's an angle break beyond that when we break here. So I'm going to make this, keep this continuous, and then we can go into MS Draft because I've got history on there. I can query edit that, maybe adjust the angle slightly. So I'm going to maybe do that by hand manually here, probably the wrong way. I'm very surprised that did that. That's weird. I'm even more surprised it's doing that. What's going on? Let's make that 90 again, see what happens. Yeah. It's really strange. Maybe I won't do that then. I'll just delete the history. Don't quite know why it was going so crazy. And then we can just move the CVs manually. So if I move the whole of this outer hull, then we keep a consistency going. And I'm just looking at the section there, just taking it back a bit. It may well be that it develops differently as we come down here, for example. We want to make this consistent rather than necessarily following exactly what the mesh does. But it does seem to flatten out a bit here, that if we now go into single point, but with PMod on, and go from here and blend that back a bit. Let's see if we can just pull that out in Y a bit. Something like that. And I've still got PMod on, so I'm going to just blend it from here as well as the center point. And then what happens down here? Similar, but it changes slightly. Well, it's sort of, it goes one way. First of all, it's going in and then it's coming out. So I don't know. I'll probably just leave that as it is for the time being. We might have to change that when we start looking at the bumper. Let's look a long way out actually at that junction there. So maybe the whole thing needs to be pulled out a bit. When I don't touch those arrows, then it's just acting as a single, as though I'm moving a single point. So just pushing that in a bit at the bottom there. Ooh. Oh, arrow and the CV are too close together. What you don't want to do is to just follow all the lumps and bumps of all of the data, because you'll end up with something that's got a lot of SE shapes to it, which is what I might have done, but let's squash that up. See if we can make out what's going on there. Very difficult to see. Got too many sections on. And we've also got curves on, which means it's really difficult to see what's going on with the CVs on the surface. So I've got rid of the curve now. I just want to make those a little bit more consistent down there. They're quite difficult ththings to see, these wheel arches in That's the wrong one. You see what I mean about the CVs. It's difficult to see which CV relates to which edge and where. It's not always easy to do, because that one's actually the inner edge, which I've picked by accident. Just trying to get a more consistent look to that edge there. I'm not sure this doesn't look right to me. This looks like it. I'd want that to go in more like that, so it's more consistent. Okay, so the other thing that we want to do, I'm just going to go with that. I'm going to increase the degree to 2, and that means that we can then pull the middle hull just to give us a little bit of crown on the surface there, so which you always want. So we'll do that in a consistent way. So I'm just going to pull the whole hull normal. Again, this is difficult to see because it's the hull is actually up here, but we're actually pulling the middle bit of the surface here. So I just pull that hull in outboard slightly, just so it's a little bit crowned. Don't want to overdo it. Now, by adding crown, of course, it then is actually going to pull this inside or the outside edge away. So maybe I'll put the bit of crown, the opposite sense, in onto that outer edge, just to get it a bit back towards the data. We don't want it too crowned. It's got to be just quite subtle. And we can put curvature on there and just see what that looks like. And you could obviously look at the min maximum values. So it's very, very little crown. It's like 3 meters of roundness to it. So it's almost flat, but it's very subtle. I'm now going to save this because I haven't saved this for ages. So we were working on this curve here, weren't we? This curve needs to come all the way back to this point here. We've also got this construction surface and lots of stuff going on here. Too many sections. Let's just take all the sections off. So we need to find out, to get this curve to connect, we need to find out where this surface intersects the construction surface. So let's go into intersect here, and we'll just put it on one surface. Don't need history on. I'm going to put it on the construction surface because we don't really want it on that surface here. I've got it, yeah. I haven't even noticed it appeared. So we've got that intersect there on this surface, and then we can put in a curve from here to that point there. So let's go from the end of that. I seem to have created 2 of them, I think, probably because I thought it had failed the first time. Not sure I need that one, but I'll keep it anyway. And so I think I've messed up again, but I put in a curve with 0 length. So we'll go from here to somewhere on this curve here. Then we can look at that in plan view, top view. Yeah, so let's increase the degree to 3. So I'm increasing it to 3 because I want this G2 continuous into this curve here. So let's go into align and do that. That was close. That was a bit of luck, but I've got create history on anyway, so it's just I can pull these points around. So I'm just trying to get that shape in there. We should look at the curvatures on this. we're not interested in maximum values or minimum values. So let's just have a look at that. And then we can query edit that blend and just make it, if we put it back a bit further that way, we can get closer to a G3 continuous curve into this area, which would be nice to have. And obviously, if we want to make it G3, we can up the degree to 4 and actually make it G3. But at the same time, I want it close to this data. So now, because it's just a curve in space, we don't want to spend too much time on that, because the position of that point might have will have an impact on the surfaces, obviously, and we need to see how that works out with the shapes that we've got. I think it'll be okay. Sort of this is all very blended in here, so it doesn't really matter where that position is. So we should be okay with that curve. We've created a curve between a point that's on this surface and another point that's on that surface. So in side view, that should all be on the same Z or the same surface there, which it pretty much is. Obviously, you could project it onto that surface if you wanted to make absolutely certain, or you can go and measure it. You know, if we want to measure it, we can go curve to surface, but it should be 0. Yeah. So we've got that in. So we need to start working on creating the surfaces coming through this way, I think. Let's just take that construction off here. And we'll get rid of all of the locators. The edge that we've got on this arch isn't exactly where it should be. We need to reduce the size of that. So we'll bring our sections back on. And then we'll just extend that backwards. It's always worth making it oversized, because it's then more sensitive to the shape, and then we can extend, or detach it or extend it backwards to get back to where we want it to be. So I've made it completely a consistent length by doing that, which is often the case. You usually want this to be pretty much constant all the way around. Not always, of course. And I've just realized I've made a mistake, haven't I? Because I didn't extend that back into the right place. I think I'm going to make that a little bit bigger. When I put that curve in, of course, I attached it to the a section or an intersect through the big surface and not through the point that I actually wanted. So I do need to correct that. So let's bring this back in, and this is where history might have helped, but of course you can't always anticipate when you want history and when you don't want history. So I want this point to actually be to join up with this arch, which it doesn't do at the minute. So let's just go into there and just correct that. So on first surface, I want the intersect between this and that, and then we'll just move that CV into the right location, which is just there instead. And then if we take the construction off, let's just have a look and see where that looks like in the data. I think it's slightly inboard of the data, yeah. And that's because our arch is slightly inboard at this point. But then I think what happens with the data is it does actually come out, it comes out further here than it is. If we look at the section there and there, they're pretty close, but this one's slightly outboard, so that's sort of got a bit of a kink in it, which I'm going to get rid of that kink. So I'm going to ignore the data a little bit there. We can always introduce it if it was a feature that was needed, but I think just to make it simple, we just keep it flowing through there in one surface. Right. Now we created this construction surface here. So I'm thinking maybe the next thing to do is to build this line here in 3D, and then we can start to build the surfaces up in this direction. Now let's have a look at that. So I'm still in a curve layer there. So we've got this construction surface. We want to create a curve. We want to do it above all of this geometry so that we can clearly see what's going on. We've got a plane here called Z1 1500, which is that one there. So if I bring the grid back up, and we can go and use that one, just so that our curves are above all of the geometry. Take these sections off, and we can squash that view up. So we're looking at this sort of line in here. Now I can tell I'm not quite in the top view, because when I did that, you notice I've created a straight line, and I did it. I pressed. I just used the left mouse button and was expecting that point to be up here, and it wasn't. And the reason is because I'm not quite in the top view, and I can tell that because it's not green. So if I just click on there again, it's gone green now. Now when I press the left mouse button and again, it does that, which is what I wanted. Let's get rid of those. And the other thing, that it disappeared below the grid as well, which was another clue that I wasn't actually in the view that I thought I was in. So we'll make that just degree 2. And then I want to make sure I'm in the right menu here. And I'm just going to move it with mouse sensitivity of 1. Just roughing it in and keeping it very simple. And then we can go into this view here in 3D. And we know that curve needs to be on this surface here. I mean, the other way I could have done this, because this is completely flat, I could have just done that as a plane. That would be another way to do this. And then I could have worked that curve actually onto that plane. The only problem with that is that then if you're in that plane, you're looking at it like that, then everything's a bit skewed. So it feels more natural to do it the way I'm doing it, I think. I'm going to project that curve down onto here. So in the Z direction. And again, we've got match original on, so exactly the same curve. And now it's not going to join up with that wheel arch yet again. We don't actually need this curve anymore. I'll sort of tidy up as I go along. We need this to join up with this intersect. I'm going to get rid of that intersect because I think it's an old one. It didn't have history on it, so we've lost that. Get rid of that one. So we want to intersect here. Ooh. Again, on the first surface of this one. Doesn't matter if you did it on the blue surface. It's just you got to remember to delete it, otherwise you'll end up, when you try and trim it, you'll end up trimming it to that curve on surface, which we don't want. So to keep that curve the same, pretty much the same as it was, if I extend it backwards and then move that CV, it's better than just moving the end point on. So that will join up now. And then we can go into, I'm going to go into the body side layer here, and we'll put some sections on. I think I'll just put X sections on, and I'll take that construction surface off because it just is too much to be able to see everything going on. And then we can just take that curve there and we can create a surface off there. Doesn't matter how you create the surface because everything's going to change anyway. And MS Draft is the obvious one again. I do use MS Draft quite a lot. I mean, if I knew that this was a constant section, then I would be putting in a curve and I'd be using a monorail. But because I don't know that that section stays the same, I just use MS Draft. Later on, I might reconstruct it with a rail, but it's simple to sort of block it in this way often. So we want to make that, we want to do that. Just want to extend that up. So I just assume it goes in the Z direction to start with, which actually is not far off. It gives us a starting point. I've got explicit control on and don't really need that. I just keep it as it is, or of course we can change that down to make that, well, it's got 4 spans here, which obviously we don't want as well. So you've got to watch out for this sort of thing happening. But if I take that off, it'll just keep the degree of the original surface, which is actually, or the original curve, which is what I want. Of course, I want to keep it really, really simple. Never want a flat surface. But this is just a starting point. You can see this crown in the mesh there, so this will need a higher degree on it anyway. If I extend it first, so I'm going to delete the history and just see how it goes through here. So this is going to be the transition around here. You know, that's going to be quite challenging because we've got to create a surface which actually joins up with this wheel arch. It may be that it might turn out relatively simple, but sometimes it can be quite complicated to get this to work. So I'm just extending that a bit more. I increase the degree in this direction, so it's now 2, and then we can move that hull inboard, give it some crown. At the same time, we need to pull this out, get closer to these sections here. The other thing that you want to be thinking about is that looking at the sections going through here, it starts off reasonably flat on the mesh, starts off reasonably flat and then accelerates. It gets tighter and tighter and tighter. So if we just keep this spacing of CVs as we've got it, we don't really capture that increasing curvature. But if we were to look at the curvature here, it's going to be very constant. So you can see it's pretty constant, and actually we want this to be tighter at the top, so we can do that by taking that top edge, that top hull, and bring it down in Z. So it'll squash up the CVs here, and it gives us that more tight curvature towards the top edge, and that's the sort of thing that we want to do here. Let's take that off. I'm going way off the data here. I mean, in fact, the data, the feature disappears. It starts off as quite sharp, very sharp here, and then disappears, and it all washes out here. So that'll take, that's another area which is going to take a lot of development to get that right. And the other thing is that by doing what I've just done, I've got it quite close here, but it's actually needs to have much more of a twist in it to get close to the sections here. This will dig in because this is now starting to come out, this shape here. So up to a certain point we be able to use this surface, but at some point this will take other surfaces will take over in this area. So it may be that we'll just look at what's going on here rather than worrying too much about what goes on here. Until we get these other surfaces in, we don't really know how this is all going to work at all. I've taken the curve off there because you start to, you know, that curve was an approximation to what was going on. And we want to start pushing CVs around on the surface itself. So it looks to me as though maybe this bit needs to go in a little bit, the whole hull. And then this one can come out a little bit. just looking at the sections there. The other section that would be useful would be the Z sections. You can see the progression there. That's actually pretty close. I think we'll leave that one as it is. Now, the other thing that's going on here is we've got this, you know, when you look at this section, it's obviously goes up to this tight point here. As we go down here, it's very tapered, and so it's quite different. So let's go and save that. So we could do an extend on this and just take that one end and just bring that down, because we don't really need that surface going so far up in space. And then this end we could bring up that way. So we're getting more of this feature here. But what we're trying to do is build block surfaces. So we want to build, well, I say we're going to try and build block surfaces. Usually, you know, if you've got a sharp break like here, there's quite a sharp break here, you can build a surface down this way, a surface into there, and then you put the blend in. But because this is such a huge blend here, I think it's not really going to be necessarily a block surface situation where we build a surface up here and another surface here, and then we put a blend between the two. This is going to become the blend, I think. There's sort of an area here which is reasonably flat, and maybe we will keep this surface in that area, but then there's going to have to be another surface coming from here, and I don't think we'll be building a surface that sort of intersects from this area, this flattish area, and intersects this one. I think we'll just be building that as a separate surface, and then another surface, and then this one will be aligning into, rather than creating a theoretical intersect between two surfaces, because it's such a huge blend here that it's not going to work like that. I mean, this shape is a very subtle, soft shape from all the way from this point to here. It doesn't really, it's sort of flattish, but it's always changing. So I don't think there's going to be like a block and then a blend between the two. These are areas where, you know, it is difficult to see what the block surface is going to be looking like, or the patch structure. I tend to just put things in that I can see clearly, and then just extend them and see whether, you know, how much of this surface how much can I extend this surface and maybe get around this blend before I need another surface. It's a bit like just building a patchwork quilt of bits that hopefully will all join up eventually. In this area, we've got this curve here which is well defined. We've got this edge here well defined. These come in as almost 90 degrees, so this would be a natural corner for a patch, for a surface. So the surface edge would come around here somewhere, go up here and across here. How it joins up, I've no idea at the minute, but somehow we create a surface in all of that area. The bigger the surface is, the better. And so I think I'm going to try and start building a surface around here as well. I'm going to put a duplicate in there. With duplicate, we've got this. Let me just undo all of that. So this interactive comes on, where if you've got interactive on it, you pick that edge and it's actually not quite on the edge, and I don't want that. I want it right on the edge. So if you take interactive off, it only lets you pick the edge, just to be on the safe side. So let me just pick those two curves there, and then I'm going to trim this one back to this one. going to have a look at that curve because it's got 4 spans on it. Why has it got 4 spans on it? If I ended up with 4 spans on here, I have. That didn't mean to do that. So I think I was, yeah, I think when I went into MS Draft, I wasn't concentrating, and so I picked up on it had 4. I think I had explicit control on and it had 4 spans in it, and I hadn't realised. So let's just see if we can get rid of that. I mean, 4 spans isn't the end of the world, but I didn't mean that. I wanted to do that with 1 span. So if I change it down to 1 span, it didn't look like it had changed at all. So I'm just going to accept that. Don't want multiple spans when I'm not intending it to happen. But it's very easy to do, of course, as you just saw. So this one, again, this one doesn't need to be 4 spans. I could tell it was 4. I could tell there was something wrong with it because the CVs were too close at that end. So there would be an edit point close to this end, which would be a clue that it's multi-span rather than single span. So I've got that curve in there. Let me just take these CVs off. That curve goes all the way around. Of course, I don't want that because I just want to build a surface that's somewhere up here. I'll extend that backwards there. Maybe take it beyond this section. I don't know whether I can get that far with one surface. And then we'll just put in a rail surface here. Again, it's just the starting point. It doesn't actually mean that that's what we want at all. So at the moment I've got parallel on. I want that to be natural. So it does that. That's definitely not what I want. But it gives us a starting point. Let me open that out. Far too many CVs because I want to be able to modify this a lot. I'm not even sure whether that's actually very useful, to be honest, whether I can do anything with that. But if I go into explicit control and I want to make that, let me make that say 4 by, and although this curve is degree 4, I don't want that many. I just want to, well, maybe I'll keep that as 4. Let's try that. And then I'm going to use, I'm just going to massage this around. I've noticed also that this is, you've got to be so alert all the time with Alias that I've got PMod on, and for some reason the value in there is 3.5, and I don't even know where that came from. So I want to make that 1 because that's the normal value you want, and I just want to squash this down and see if I can get anything like the shape that I'm after. So I'm just squashing it in the Z direction. You can see it's just crazy here. So it's not really been of much use, that surface as it stands, but we can carry on trying to work with that. I'm actually going to see if I can, let's just get that. I'll just put it that way. And then I'm going to do this. So I'm going to do a 3D trim normal to that section. Just trim it back to that section, which is, of course, it's all nonsense. That section's completely rubbish. But what it does mean, yeah, I'm not sure whether it's of any use, but let's go into duplicate, create a curve on there. So at least we've got the curve that's on that X section. Let's get rid of those CVs. And I'm just wondering whether we can use those CVs to create that sort of shape. So we just want a single point here, not PMod. Just want to move these points down. So I'm looking at the section on the mesh there, and I just want 1 point. So I'm moving them just in the Z direction for what it's worth. We can also extend this a little bit because I wanted to try and I'm trying to get the shape of that mesh in there. I might throw that surface in the bin in a minute. So I don't know whether I actually got any benefit from putting that surface in. The only thing is I've got the spacing of those CVs is similar to the front edge, so that could be handy. Now that's not quite the same as the data, but then our wheel arch isn't quite the same as the data either. So something like that. The thing is the length of that flat there is slightly longer than the mesh there, but when we looked around here, it was close. So it's going to be a compromise anyway. Now this rubbish surface here, I'm just wondering if we just did an align on that. So I'm going to align that to that curve. Obviously, that's just bending the end piece down there, but then we can put some blending on and just see if we can mess around with that. So it's more like sculpting than actually constructing stuff in a sensible fashion. So I've said I want to influence all of these rows. I can change these hulls. I can change the blend factor and see if that also helps in some way. So it's sort of getting closer to the shape there. And the thing about it is, I suppose the CVs, although they're all over the place, it's quite simple, and we can start to improve the shape or the positioning of those. So let's have a look at that in the plan view. They don't look too bad from that view, and we can use PMod because it gives us that sort of blended ability here. So I'm going to hit the arrows there. So I'll move that back in the X direction if it'll let me do it, which it won't do because I think, have I got some history on there? Yes, I have. So I've got history on in my line, which is why it wouldn't let me move anything. So if I delete the history, delete construction history. Oh, why won't it let me delete the construction history? Right. And then we can use PMod on that, blend it across to here, move that back in the X direction. This one again, the 3 comes up because I'm picking a similar point. It keeps that value, and then I can push that in X. I can also push it in Z. This one, I'll push that down in Z. So we're starting to get close to that data. So although that initial surface was complete rubbish, it was just a way of creating something that we can then start working from.